Be a wonderful time to call on the MD of Graphic to give us his welcome address, Mr. Atuafo. Round of applause for him, please.
The Honorable Minister of State at the Ministry of Finance, Honorable Charles Adu Boahen, our special guest, Dr. Abdallah Ali Nachia, our expert panel members, Dr. Randolph Nsuru Ambala and Dr. Priscilla Chumisi, the Managing Director of Stanbic Bank Ghana, Kwamina Aswini, fellow Chief Executives, Management of the Graphic Communications Group Limited, ladies, gentlemen, and our audience member networks around the regions of this country and around the world. It is my honor to welcome you to this edition of the Graphic Business Stanbic Bank Breakfast Meeting, a platform that sets the tone for informed discourse on important topics that impact business and the economy at large. Today, we will be discussing the 2022 budget with a view to making inputs that may potentially influence the content direction and the discussions under the theme Pre-Budget 2022, Insights and Recommendations. One of the key outtakes, I believe, for many a consumer, many a business is potentially a hope that there will be no new taxes in the year 2022. But that may be our wish. What will be the decision of the experts, the demands of business, the demands of the wider society? Government obviously needs to drive revenue generation and grow the base to enable a further revenue collection that would enable the budget to be sustainable and to be sustained. And importantly, a budget that would impact consumer lives and enable consumer confidence to enable ongoing spending in our broader socio-economic lives. And we need to bear in mind that the 2022 budget is not about businesses alone. Importantly, it has implications for the ordinary Ghanaian in the streets, in our homes, across our schools and campuses, markets, cities, towns, and villages. So when these discussions are going on, let's not begin to think and presume that it's about only big business and big experts, PhDs, and others. Therefore, today's business offers an opportunity to enable many Ghanaians to join this discussion virtually. We want this to be as participatory as possible, and we want to hear from all of you around the country and around the world who have an interest in the 2022 budget in Ghana. And I'm confident that the technocrats that we've enabled and assembled here would guide the discourse with practical thoughts, ideas that could help shape this agenda. And on this note, it is my singular honor and privilege to welcome you all, and I'm confident that we will have an insightful and enabling discussion devoid of noise. I thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we can do more. Appreciating Mr. Atuafo, MD of Graphic. He came to give us a welcome address, but he also made a passionate appeal about whether there wouldn't be taxes or not. They say that when you want to speak to God, you speak to the air. But what about when you want to speak to the human being who matters? And he's here with us. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to call upon an MD of a bank that believes in this discourse that indeed you have to bring those who matter in the business community and also the stakeholders and those who manage the policy space to have this discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome the Managing Director of Stanbic Bank Ghana, Mr. Kwamena. Asumeni.
The Honorable Minister of State at the Ministry of Finance, Honorable Charles Adu Boahen, the Managing Director of Graphic Communications Group Limited, Mr. Adu Boahen, our distinguished special guests and panelists, guests both here physically and virtually around the world, our friends from the media, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome you once again to this morning's session. Our budget discussions this year are occurring at a time when Ghana's fiscal position and trajectory are receiving increased scrutiny from our external investors. These investors have underlined their concerns by trading their positions quite aggressively. Together with our partners, we're pleased to provide this platform as an avenue for the business community, for citizens, experts in the financial industry, and the government to actively contribute to the debate on our fiscal performance and outlook. In doing so, we envision a flood of ideas and approaches that will support the development of policies and programs to reverse these trends and improve our outcomes as a nation. Ghana isn't the only nation with increased debt levels and widened fiscal deficits and sluggish growth in the COVID-19 era. Yet the fact that when compared to our peers, our bonds are currently attracting higher risk premiums raises uncertainty as to how the financing of the budget deficit will be accomplished efficiently. But more importantly, these trends dictate that we significantly improve the execution of our budgets, especially since the levers available to address the widening deficits, which are stimulation of growth, a reduction in spending, and not surprisingly, the raising of additional revenue through taxes, are universally known and consistently cited in our budgets. It is my expectation, therefore, that a meaningful proportion of today's discussions will focus on stimulating conversations about improving our results from our budgeting process through more effective execution. Clearly, our budgets are prepared with painstaking detail and presented with precision. But a gap often emerges between what our leaders want to achieve and the required discipline for meshing strategy with reality, aligning people with goals, and achieving the results promised. To what extent are the action plans that the budgets represent and which are to support the government's strategic plan appropriate? Will execution discipline be enhanced with more detailed operating plans, complete with time-bound activities and targets that synchronize and provide a framework for all of the government's divisions? What are the milestones in our budgets and government strategy? When government fails to meet such milestones as it executes the plan, how do our policymakers reconsider whether they have the right strategy after all and adapt over the course of the budget year? These are some of the questions that I believe we will seek to get answers today. Ultimately, to improve the results in any endeavor, we need to understand where the results come from and then improve the processes and initiatives that cause them. To my mind, these are some of the burning issues that I believe our panel of experts will tackle and keep the conversation going this morning. Thank you very much.
Let's do it again for Mr. Sumeni. Indeed, such a wonderful speech, and he has set the tone for us here this morning with respect to what the business community will be looking forward to in the 2022 budget that will be presented to Parliament on November 17 by the Finance Minister, Ken Ofori-Atta. So what should he be looking forward to? I know that most of the time the ministers don't want to give us insights to what should be expecting, only to sometimes, quote, confuse us more as to what is coming. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome the Minister of State at the Finance Ministry for his keynote address. Honorable Charles Adu Boahen.
Thank you very much, and thank you, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, and all dignitaries. I stand on the protocols of the previous speakers. I remember, was it Ronald Reagan who in his campaign said the famous, "Read my lips, no new taxes," and promptly decided to do so as soon as he got elected. So I'm not going to go there because, you can't take my word for it about reading my lips. But what I think I could do is set the stage and give you some background as to where we are, where we come from, and I'm hoping that will help us in our deliberations today. I'm hoping that we'll be able to come up with some great ideas today during the panel session, and I'll be all ears looking to see what we can incorporate into our budget because, businessmen and women like yourselves and citizens are the ones who feel the pulse of the nation and understand exactly what the issues are. But to set the stage, I think it's important that we remind ourselves about where we've come from. 18 months ago, we were all thrust into the COVID pandemic through no fault of ours. It had a devastating effect on our finances and on our plans and programs. We had enjoyed 3 years of consecutive growth at about 6.9% between 2017 and 2019. We had reduced the policy rate from about 25.5% to 16% by 2019. Reserve position had improved to about 3.5 times import cover in 2016 to about 4 times in 2019. And we had chalked a positive trade balance consistently, amounting to about $2.3 billion in 2019 as against a negative position of $1.8 billion in 2016. So for all intents and purposes and by all measures, we seem to have done pretty well going into 2020, and we're very eager and looking forward to a year in 2020 that would have even chalked up more gains for us. And all these achievements were made possible by prudent monetary programs, sound fiscal policies, and targeted structural interventions that helped Ghana to be better positioned to weather the impact of the pandemic. However, COVID hit, and by the end of 2020, GDP growth had slowed down from 6.9 to a very anemic 0.4%. Inflation had crept up but remained around the 10% target. The cedi stayed pretty stabilized at 3.9%, but which is comparable to 71% depreciation between 2013 and 2016, and 26.3% between 2017 and 2019, and 30.2% between 2017 and 2020. However, we saw our debt to GDP balloon to over 76%, and as well as we saw a precipitous drop in our revenues, entirely because of the COVID pandemic. So that was how we sort of started 2021. Clearly, we had to really review our policies and our strategies and come up with a budget that was anchored on debt sustainability, but also could provide some kind of fiscal stimulus that would provide the stimulus to push us back out of the COVID-induced recession. So but we had to anchor this on debt sustainability because we had really, because of the COVID pandemic, really increased our total debt stock. So we focused the budget also on consolidation and also on completion of existing projects. We figured out, look, instead of announcing new projects, we should focus on all these projects that were out there, partially completed, and focus on completing them rather than introducing any new projects, in line with the whole fiscal consolidation stance. I must remind the audience that we between 2017 and 2019, we essentially had really managed to have a careful blend of fiscal consolidation where we brought the deficit down considerably, but at the same time managed to identify programs and policies that created or generated the growth we needed to sustain that 6.9% GDP growth. It's a very fine balance to be able to balance the two. On one side, be consolidating, and on the other side, be investing for growth. Because people will say to invest for growth, you have to have expansionary policies. So that was the focus for the 2021 budget: prudent economic management, sound monetary policy, a firm commitment to return to the Fiscal Responsibility Act of under 5% by 2024. We also introduced the Ghana Cares program, which was an ambitious 100 billion package between government of 30 billion and private sector of 70 billion over the next couple of years to drive or provide a stimulus for growth. We've seen some economic recovery in 2021. Q2 GDP growth indicates growth of, I think it was 3.9% in Q2 of 2021. Reserves positions have improved, and the lending rates have continued to decline to about 20.5 as of August 2021. As I said, our latest estimates suggest the economy grew by 3.9% in the second quarter of 2021. And we believe, while the deficit remained firmly at 9.4% against the target of 9.9% of GDP, as reported in September 2021. Our focus over the immediate to the near term is to press ahead with economic and fiscal reforms to lock in economic stability and lay the foundations for sustainable and inclusive growth. The second phase of reforms being implemented under the Ghana Cares program reflects our resolve to use the pandemic as an opportunity to build resilience against future crises and support an equitable post-COVID recovery. Ladies and gentlemen, fiscal discipline is even more important, essential today because of the changed global climate. Across many African countries, fiscal policies and debt levels came under severe pressure due to limited policy space and domestic and external macroeconomic vulnerabilities, increased health expenditures, and the need to provide fiscal stimulus combined with revenue loss exerted strong budgetary pressures on government financing. I'm sure you've all noticed recently the global sell-off in our euro bonds on the international stock markets. There's been a general sell-off, but I think those of Ghana has been quite pronounced. It is a situation that is of concern, but I want to assure the audience that nothing fundamentally has changed. We are still on track to meet our deficit. We are still on track with regards to our revenue targets for the year. And we believe that the market reaction is not based on the fundamentals, which are essentially just as robust as they were 3, 4, 5 months ago. And we believe that in this coming budget, we would be able to reassure investors about, the credibility of what we are trying to do as a country. There's also been some capital flight as investors have moved funds back to the United States as yields in the West have become more attractive on the back of quite a lot of quantitative easing and a lot of spending, which has pushed rates up and inflation, which makes, rates back home vis-a-vis those here a little more attractive. So for the more conservative, it has been timely for them to move back to the West to invest. So we've continued to focus the budget, this coming 2022 budget, on some key highlights, especially given the backdrop to where we are today. We continue to still have high debt levels. We continue to still have challenges with regards to our interest rates. That has had an impact on ability for private sector to be able to borrow at attractive rates to fund investments and expand the economy. We continue to see some serious challenges with regards to job creation, especially for the youth. I think the just ended census confirmed the fact that Ghana has a very youthful population, and we're churning out graduates every day who are struggling to find jobs, and we really need to be able to create an environment and jobs opportunities for the youth to be able to make sure that they are employed. So on the back of that, this budget is focused on expenditure rationalization and optimizing the implementation of flagship and strategic programs, widening and deepening existing revenue sources, including expanding the tax net. Due to the elevated debt levels in 2020, we saw our fiscal space continue to be eaten up by high interest expense. If you look at how much of our revenue we're using to service our debt, it is clear that we need to look at how we can reduce the cost of borrowing. I see my good friend here, an MD of Stanbic Bank. What he didn't tell you is that we had a meeting with him and his colleagues, and we were like, guys, this interest rate environment is not sustainable. How can we see, what can we do to reduce the rates so that we can get the impetus to move this economy forward? Alongside that, given the fact that we have such high debt levels, we have to focus on revenue maximization. And we still really do not believe that we are maximizing our revenue potential. I think our tax revenues as a percentage of GDP is under 14%, between 13 to 14%. Most countries, even some of our peers in Africa, is closer to 18 or 19%. So clearly, there's a lot of room for growth. We've set up a revenue assurance unit within the Ministry of Finance with a focus on trying to plug the leakages. We also feel like the digitalization drive is putting in place the foundation to be able to formalize the economy and create the basis for us to be able to generate more revenue. But it's a fundamental cornerstone or anchor of our budget into 2022, the importance of digitization and deepening and widening the revenue sources. As I said already, debt sustainability amidst fiscal consolidation is also a big priority for us. We want to make sure that we continue to focus on putting our debt on a declining path as we move forward in order for us to get to what we believe should be normal levels around 60 to 65% debt to GDP. We also should not underestimate the importance of herd immunity through an aggressive vaccine rollout campaign. Our people can only be productive if they are healthy. And if, as you see, people still are not really, the workforce is still partially working from home. Not everybody is in the office. And so therefore, I do not believe that our productivity levels have gotten back to where they were prior to 2020. So it's important that we get everybody immunized, vaccinated, so we can get back to normal as quickly as possible. I think right now we have more than enough vaccines in town. And for those of you who are not vaccinated, I really encourage you to do so. And because the uptake has not been as good as we would like. And for some reason, people don't feel like they need to get vaccinated, but I think it's absolutely important that we do. We are not out of the woods yet, if I may emphasize that, and we should make sure that we get vaccinated. We also would like to focus this budget on returning our GDP growth to levels around above 5% in the medium term, and looking to invest in the productive sectors of the economy to achieve that. And last but not the least, focus on job creation, especially target to the youth, and also entrepreneurship, because we believe that, especially in the environment we are today, we really need to find ways to create a more entrepreneurial society, a society where everybody is not afraid to venture out and try a business or some kind of occupation, and provide them with the tools and the training to be able to do so. If we all, or a lot of us, try something entrepreneurial, more likely than not, we might create 2, 3, 4 jobs in the process. I remember, I think it was 2 weeks ago, my minister mentioned that the payroll sector is full, much to the consternation of a lot of people. But I think he was just telling the truth. And if we have that mindset, I think we will all start to look outside of the box and outside of the typical employment channels to see what there is available. I must say I've been very impressed by what I see online and the creativity and the resourcefulness of the Ghanaian people. If you go on Instagram and you see the fashion and the artistry and creativity of Ghanaians who now have a platform, a global platform, and the likes of Amazon and Instagram to be able to showcase their wares. So, that challenge we had when we were growing up, where if you wanted to start something, you had to literally not go from door to door or spend a lot of money on advertising. You really don't have that barrier to entry now in terms of trying to come up with your own products. And I must say there are some really talented people around. There was a text going around the other day about a gentleman who is doing furniture. And there were pictures of it, and his number was on the bottom of it. And I saw some of the furniture, and I was like, whoa, this is really, really, really cool stuff. And with WhatsApp and Instagram, he can reach tens of thousands of people. And so maybe the only challenge or impediment to people like that is capital, startup capital. So we need to figure out a way to provide that, $5,000, 10,000 cedis for startups. And same in the agricultural sector. I think I was listening to City, was it earlier on this year, and they interviewed a gentleman who had a piggery. And when you listen to him and where he started from and what he has today, you realize that you don't really need a lot of money to start, a piggery, and it can be quite a lucrative business. Then they also interviewed a lady who had gone into palm in a joint venture with some chiefs, and had, now has a pretty sizable palm plantation. And I was very impressed. And then there was another gentleman I spoke to who was growing corn. And the sort of analysis he had applied to corn growing, I was like, whoa, including the spacing, how to maximize every acre. And I was like, we are thinking, And so I think we need to really encourage that entrepreneurship drive and find ways to create a more entrepreneurial society right from the curriculum in the schools so that, we provide the youth with the right tools to be able to capitalize on that, and rather than sit at home waiting for that public sector job. So on that note, I'll end here. And actually, no, I have a couple of more points to go on. So, ambition to use the 2022 budget to extend opportunities for all Ghanaians. Doing so will necessitate the creation of fiscal space and a strict commitment control in budget implementation. The initiatives to be announced in the 2022 budget will be centered on gradually returning our economy to deficit levels under 5% by 2024, while maintaining our commitment to invest in infrastructure, promote enterprise growth and entrepreneurship, and support social and welfare systems. We are confident, just the same way that we brought this economy back to life before the pandemic, that we can do so again post-pandemic. Our ongoing pre-budget consultations are also examining how to provide targeted support towards vulnerable communities to manage the spread of the virus and encourage economic activity. We will also deepen engagements with the private sector. Working in tandem with the private sector will be crucial for realizing our growth aspirations and crowding in the requisite funding to support the CARES program, which I mentioned earlier. Ultimately, our target remains to create a conducive, compelling, and ultimately resilient economic environment fit for business, enterprise, and innovation. With regards to the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, in Africa, over 8.6 million cases have been recorded as of today, 2nd November. The recovery rate is about 92.2% compared to Ghana, which is about 97.2%. However, sadly, we have lost over 1,200 lives to date, and our condolences go out to the families of those who have lost a loved one to this pandemic. We need to make sure we all get vaccinated. I cannot say that enough. With that being said, Ghana is aggressively rolling out its vaccination program. To date, we have received over 5.33 million vaccines, and over 2 million vaccines have been administered. Let me use this opportunity to encourage all of us to get vaccinated so we can achieve herd immunity and build greater resilience as we build back better. In fulfilling each side of our unwritten social contract, I'm confident we can achieve from this year a sustainable and robust recovery. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Charles Adu Boahen, Minister of State at the Finance Ministry. When he started his speech and gave the read my lips analogy, I was so excited because I got the understanding that maybe there wouldn't be any new tax. Of course, there will be expenditure rationalization, and therefore that will be the way forward. But he made some very important points that also got me thinking. Talking about expenditure rationalization, expanding the tax net, maximizing revenue potential, low tax level, and digitization. So with all these things you spoke about, how do we get the money to fund those expenditures as well of government? Something has to happen. And I know that a lot of questions are going through your mind. That's what is going to happen in the 2022 budget. But I wouldn't waste my time because it'll be time for us to also move into our panel discussion here that we are gathered here at the graphic Stanbic Bank Breakfast Meeting in terms of the pre-budget analysis going forward. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to invite these distinguished persons who are going to help us with our whole panel discussion this morning. Dr. Priscilla Chimisi-Balfour, she is a senior lecturer at the Econs Department. With a round of applause, let's welcome her on stage. Ladies and gentlemen, we can do better than that. I would also want to invite a senior lecturer at the department, a senior lecturer, financial consultant, and a senior lecturer at GIMP, Dr. Randolph Ansambela. And the final one, our own friend, Dr. Abdullah Ali Nacha is a senior lecturer at the School of Law, a tax person. He drinks tax, he eats tax, he sleeps tax. Wake him up at 2 a.m. and he'll give you all the laws about taxes. Let's welcome Dr. Abdullah Ali Nacha. So, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, these are the panel that we're going to have a discussion on the insights into the 2022 budget. And indeed, I'd like to thank you all, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, for joining us on this panel. So, I'll first want to start by just getting quick thoughts on the speech by the Minister of State of the Finance Ministry. Let me start with Doc first, please.
Okay, thank you very much, George. I believe that the stage is set. It is important as a country for us to be creative, think critically, and look at how we increase our revenue base, that is resource mobilization, because our economy is predominantly informal. As we work on tax rationalization, digitization to improve resources that come in, there is that much we can get through the formal sector, and that is through direct taxes. So we need to think critically and be creative as to how we get the majority in the informal sector on board, and that is on the tax revenue mobilization angle. On the other hand, when we come to the expenditure side, we need to look critically at expenditure rationalization, and the minister mentioned it. How useful or how productive is every cedi that government spends in the country? So in this regard, I believe that we should think, because basically the problem of economics is about meeting unlimited wants with limited resources. So for that matter, we need to prioritize. And when prioritization comes in, that is when we need to plan and get value for money. The question is, are we getting value for money in this country? With the various budgets we have gone through, Ghana has gone through different phases with economic planning. So in that regard, are we getting value for every expenditure that government rolls out there? If we are, what is happening with a lot of uncompleted projects we find in this country? A lot of trend is also coming up with respect to judgment debts, and these are all the use of public funds. So indeed, as a country, we need to look and think critically going forward. So that is on the tax angle. On the other hand, how do revenue come in? I believe that Ghana is also a resource-rich nation. What are we getting from our resources? Currently, we are doing like 4% to GDP from our mineral resources. Countries like Botswana are doing about 18 to 20%. What kinds of deals are we signing? We don't have the resources to exploit the resources. We come in, people come in, investors come in. So at the point of entry, because we do not have it, they come with the resources, we accept what they give us because they are coming to exploit. It's a risk. But once they discover, going forward, subsequently, what kinds of deals do we go in for? Because truth be told, when these resources are exploited, they come with a lot of adverse effects on our economy, on our society. And the citizens ought to benefit from the exploitation of these resources because they are not renewable as well. So these are thoughts that we need to think through going forward. I think, George, I'll end here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those initial comments coming from Dr. Presla Chumesibafo. She's a senior lecturer, Department of Economics at the University of Ghana. Let's go to Dr. Randolph Nsambela. How about your initial comment? Before you go ahead with your comment, I'll just plead with you, Alina, can you move to the other seat? So let's do some shifting cultivation here, and then Doc, you also move to the other side. Also, I join this year.
I presume the mic is on. Thanks, Honorable Minister of State. I think that in many respects, he was bold enough with some of his assertions around market restriction, market access restriction, and the challenges we are going to have raising money in the future and stuff. But there are a couple of things I picked up that I found problematic. The first one was that I got the impression that he did not see fiscal consolidation as having a stimulating effect. In his words, it suggested that fiscal consolidation necessarily was not expansionary enough, and that if a nation engages in fiscal consolidation, there were challenges with growth. Perhaps that is part of the problems we face as a nation. Consolidation is not supposed to be constraining on growth. Consolidation is essentially basically saying, practice some level of financial discipline or physical discipline so that you can prioritize your resources and focus on sustainable projects rather than on a laundry list. So perhaps a retooling of our mindset about the constraining effects of fiscal consolidation may be helpful, because at the point that we are in our evolution, our growth evolution, we do not need to be seeing fiscal consolidation as growth restricting. It's probably part of the reason why we've not been practicing it well enough. There are a couple of other points he made. I'm not going to dwell too much on that, but I found that problematic, and I think that as the discussion goes on, we'll get into a couple of those. The lack of appreciation of the level of awareness of the market defies in the face of various principles we have practiced or we've been taught. It's a bit condescending to suggest that the market is not aware of the underlying fundamentals of an economy. The market can be tolerant to a point. Perhaps we need to have the reality check that the reaction of the market is an appreciation of the fact that our fundamentals need to be rechecked. If we write it off as basically saying that they don't see what we see, it defies the logic of the rationality of the market. I mean, in many respects, with our last bond, we made a couple of promises to the market. One of them being the fact that we're going to outlaw an exemption regime for taxation. We didn't implement that. The market is obviously going to react to things like that. We need to start appreciating the fact that rhetoric diffusion is only sustainable to a particular point, and beyond that point, the reality begins to catch up with you. Now, he made a few points that I considered useful, but for me, they are business as usual. One of the things I didn't hear him talk about is an aggressive attempt to deal with the private sector debt, the amount that government owes the private sector. That is basically mopping up liquidity in the private sector. Banks are not having access to money, and perhaps it starts with us going back to 2017 levels, where we start even being transparent, as the IMF and World Bank have been telling us, about what that debt position is to the private sector. Because promising to pay, say, 3.5 billion cedis, as we did in our last budget, without giving us the full visibility of what that debt position actually is, doesn't give us enough to be able to assess how effective you are performing vis-a-vis your target in the first place, and how much of it you are dealing with. We need to have a retooling of our mindset. And for me, we cannot tax our way into growth. Neither can we borrow our way to growth. We probably need to start reappreciating the fact that if we leverage the capacity of the private sector, we can introduce operational efficiencies into the way we do things, and perhaps we'll have more agility and absorption capacity to deal with the constraints that are thrown to us by external shocks. So perhaps let's rethink it. Instead of thinking about increasing taxes, instead of thinking about advancing more taxes, let's think about ways where we can provide the private sector with the capital they need, with the freedom they need to have free cash flows, to be able to expand, to grow. Let's look at laws or systems that encourage inbuilt or homegrown private sector capacity rather than heavy importation, and perhaps rethink the whole process and see how that works. Because we've tried all this, taxing our way out of it, borrowing our way out of it, and none of them has delivered to us so far. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nsambela. He's a senior lecturer at GEMPA and a financial consultant. Let me go to Dr. Lina Chia on your initial thoughts on the speech by the Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much. I think although Honorable Minister didn't want us to read his lips, at least we heard his voice. Though he did mention that they are not too much looking into increases in taxes, but rather trying to see how they can be efficient and effective in revenue mobilization. I think that is where my concern is, because over the years, I have held that we've had a lot of tax increases, yet we do not see the outturn in the growth. We are still within the 13 to 14% of GDP, when our peers are in 18 and 20%. That tells us that we rather need to be efficient and effective in the collection of the existing taxes. One of the key ways, he mentioned that they want to look at blocking loopholes. One of the key areas is the various tax exemptions. And there has been a tax exemptions bill in Parliament since 2019. Came out, redrafted as 2020. Now I think it's out again as the tax exemption bill 2021. We are just hoping and praying in this budget they would quickly come out with the tax exemption bill, which will put a check on the way exemptions are determined, how they are granted, how they are monitored, because there is nothing bad in granting exemptions, but there should always be value for money. If you grant exemptions, for example, in the free zones, the idea is to ensure that they will be able to produce for export of at least not less than 70% of their output. The idea is that they will bring in the needed foreign exchange. It can shore up our city. They are also going to help us in technology transfer, so we will learn a lot more better ways of producing. They will also be able to create jobs. So we need to benchmark these and find out if we are not getting the benefits for which we've given the exemption, then those exemptions need to be reviewed. Those that has to be taken away needs to be taken away, and that is one sure way. The next that I heard, which I was very happy about, is the digitization drive. Immediately you go through digitization, you make it easy for tax compliance. Today, the Ghana Revenue Authority has the GITMIS, Ghana the Income Tax Management Information System, which is very good system. You can sit in the comfort of your home, your office, anywhere, and file your returns without interacting with any revenue officer. This would help us in getting ready receipt of our revenues. If on filing the returns, you can go onto the portal and make your payment through the designated banks. And indeed, for the informal sector, the Ghana Revenue Authority has also come up with a mobile money number, *222#. And the informal sector can, at the comfort of their shops, also make payment of their little contribution to state revenue mobilization. It will interest you to note that if they are even to pay 10 Ghana cedis, 20 Ghana cedis a week, at the end of the year, they would have finished paying their taxes without even feeling the pinch, because nobody loves to pay taxes. And I think this piecemeal payment is not something strange. We have introduced it in our Yibima promo of trying to get contributions for the National Cathedral. How much more the national coffers? So I think we should look at that. And then also, we are also looking at the fact that some of the laws need revision. There are some provisions that put a lot of pressure on the private sector. One key area I keep complaining about is the straight levies that we've taken out from the value-added tax and are imposing it on the cost before we apply VAT again. It leads to what in taxation we call the cascading effect of tax. Because there is a tax upon a tax. The 2.5 Get Fund, 2.5 National Health Insurance Levy, 1% COVID Health Recovery Levy is added to cost. And the total suffers the VAT. So you find the VAT 12.5 being applied on the COVID levy, on the Get Fund, and the cost goes up. The cry of private sector is a lot of such taxes because the indirect taxes are to cost of doing business. And it is interesting that they've stopped publishing it. Otherwise, Ghana was recovering from the position it was in the cost of doing business ranking. But the complaint when you read the report is specifically these kind of taxes and the way they cascade into. So with digitalization, I believe that revenue has done its bit trying to automate its processes and making it easier for us to comply. So for me, I don't expect, and I wish, and as the minister said, and I agree with him, I think we've got a caution from our IGP, Dr. Dampare, about prophecies. So initially when I was being invited, I said, I hope I won't come and make a prophecy about what will be in the budget, so I'll be arrested. So no prophecies, but we are hoping that, Minister, in reading your words and not your lips, we will see any increases in taxes. And on the entrepreneurship, I watched a video where there is a man in one of the regions, they call him the plantain man. He's been able to make soap from plantain, even got alcoholic and non-alcoholic beverages from the stem of the plantain, and the roots of the plantain he has used to produce something you can use to cure diabetes, hypertension. It's trending over social media. Such people, can we locate them, assist them? They could go into the 1D, 1F for us. We can get locally manufactured products, and that will help. So I think the entrepreneurial drive to assist such people with such kind of ideas is very helpful. Thank you very much.
Doc, let me still coming back again on a follow-up question to you. So it appears that the problem has to do with the collection, the implementation, and not maybe hiking rates or new taxes. Sure. How do we get it right with the collection going forward? Because you still read the data and all the rest, and you get the understanding that in terms of economic activities in the country, we're still not collecting enough taxes to match what is happening. Okay. So what can we do right going forward with respect to the collection of taxes?
Thank you very much. One of the key strategies we can use, which the GRA already started, is for us to link the taxpayer identification number to the Ghana card, which they have done, and everybody is encouraged to do that. The next is linking that to the social security number. Now, in this case, you are going to ensure that all employees are captured, all payments of salary, allowances, nothing will go under the radar. Once you are done with that, we need to also link our taxpayer identification card with the DVLA. If you step out on the street, the number of vehicles and the kinds of vehicles you see, for me, they represent income. Because with that income, you bought that vehicle. So it tells us to be able to look at your tax returns, whether you are earning enough for that value of the car. A lifestyle audit. And if it does not match that, you need to explain. Is it a brother who assisted you to buy? Is it income elsewhere you've not disclosed? We need to also link the thing to the lands registry. People are acquiring property. People are buying land. How do they get the income? When we link it up, it can pop up to tell us that you've acquired such property at such a place for this value. And we can match it with your tax returns to see. We also have to link it up. We already have it linked to the ICOMS, Integrated Customs Management System. If you are importing goods, the value of the imports should link up to the volume of your sales. And then we can match out your costs and get your real sales or turnover, and then we'll be able to match up with the profit you are making. So I think that one of the key areas is linking up this taxpayer identification number, because you will realize that if you read the income tax law, it is clear in the Revenue Administration Act, in the First Schedule, Part 2, it is clear that professional bodies cannot renew the practicing licenses of its members if they don't produce a tax clearance certificate. I'm not sure any professional body has complied with this law since it came into effect in 2016. So all chartered accountants need to produce tax clearance certificate because the Institute of Chartered Accountants can renew. All doctors need to get it before they will get their registration renewed by the Medical and Dental Council. All tax consultants by the Chartered Institute of Taxation. All lawyers by the General Legal Council and the Bar Association need to produce evidence that they filed their tax returns and paid the appropriate taxes. These are the ways by which we can ensure everybody gets on board. And then the GITMIS has an octopus model which will link up with the informal sector, and that is still under deployment by the GRA. So I am sure that, as Minister said, if we can go to the full exploration of these linkages by IT, we should be able to mobilize and get everybody to contribute his or her quota.
Thank you, Dr. Abdul Nacha. I think that's for some. Thank you so much. A round of applause won't be bad. I think that for a lot of people, maybe getting the debt challenge over or managing it will also be about raising the required revenue as well and raising these revenue internally as well. Let me come to Dr. Chimesi. There's talk about growth, recovery, and all the rest. How do we ensure that whatever growth that we achieve or embark on comes with the required jobs and not the jobless growth?
Okay, thank you very much once again, George. So when you look at the trajectory of growth for Ghana, you can clearly tell that our economy is structurally transforming. We are moved from agriculture, but the expectation as economists with all developed countries is that as you transition from agriculture, you move into manufacturing and industry, and then later in your development, you move into services. The pattern we see for Ghana is that now agriculture has lost its hold rightfully because we have transformed, but you see that service is the driver of the growth. The challenge with service being a driver of growth is that services are not labor-intensive activities. And services require more than average education. You require your tertiary educated graduates at the higher end of your services. And the other bit of the service we see in Ghana is that it is also dominated by informal sector activities. And that explains the precarious job situation we find in Ghana. So first of all, on the job market, we have two issues. People are working, but their jobs are very vulnerable. And the COVID pandemic clearly showed the extent of vulnerability in the labor market. The other bit is that others are also looking for jobs that do not exist. So how do we get back to basics? Based on currently the urbanization drive, we see young people moving from rural areas into our cities. We need to get back and look at how we get back to the relevant middle. The manufacturing sector, which employs your average high school to technical school graduates. So on the back of that, the One District, One Factory initiative is in sync with an industrialization drive. The point is, how are we monitoring the companies that are beneficiaries of this? Because we always say that we have come a long road. We have looked at infant industry argument for our industrialization drive since independence, which has not worked. So we need to think creatively, tax the beneficiaries to produce output, to show evidence of employment, for example. And in this regard, as we do that, so we are adding value, our grake is growing, adding value to the produce that are coming from our agricultural sector to the manufacturing base, creating jobs for the youth that need the jobs within that sector, and also growing and tapping into growing market. Truth be told, Ghana is a small nation in terms of market power. So in this regard, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, as it's come into power, how are we positioning our companies to take advantage of a larger market that is coming up? And I must backtrack on the entrepreneurship drive as well. We also need to be careful in driving people into entrepreneurship, because not everybody is born an entrepreneur, and that is true. We cannot be creating entrepreneurs all over, because when we do that, it means that we will be losing the drive for entrepreneurship, because we'll basically be creating informal sector activities. People are doing stuff that are not your cutting edge, innovative entrepreneurship activity that you want to find. So we need to find winners in that space. Young people are entrepreneurial in nature. Which people have marketable, bankable ideas that can be supported to create jobs? Because the reality is that some people are born employees, others are born employers, and we cannot push everybody into being an employer.
Interesting thoughts. I'll be coming back to you on. Thank you so much. A very interesting question that I want to pick all your thoughts on. We'll also be going back to the audience for some key persons for their quick comments, come back to you and go back, because this whole program is about being interactive, because we brought you here. I've seen Visha Shagboy around, I've seen the Guta president here, and also be going back to the Minister of State for some quick comments on some concerns that have been expressed. I believe that jobs will be a very critical thing going into next year. Already, there's been talk about entrepreneurship, the fix the country and all the rest. Now, one critical thing, a lot of persons were asked to go home during the pandemic. Any company that is picking up might want to give the first option to those who are asked to go home. Now, going into next year, faced with a challenge where I asked about 1,000 workers to go home, about 2,000 applications on my doorsteps. How do I deal with this challenge if a business is picking up? Shall I bring back my workers who are there? Or just look at those who are knocking on my door, because maybe I can just offer them some small salary for them to come on board? Let me start with Dr. Ali Nachia first on dealing with the jobs challenge going into next year. Yes, government cannot employ. Let's also support the private sector. Let's support other businesses so they can employ. How do you deal with recalling those who are asked to go home and dealing with the fresh job hunts?
Thank you very much. I think that if you look at the job market, the challenge even does not end there, but also with a very good initiative like NABCO, which has come to its end. Honorable Minister, I hope I'm right. I think that we still have a role for them to play. If I take the space of the revenue, I keep asking, if we are to take the people there and train them, I believe what they can help us generate can pay them their salaries. I'll give one example. I keep saying that if you go around a lot of our communities, Airport Residential, Cantonment, Laboni, and now maybe East Legon, I think the place is about 1/3 owner-occupied. 2/3 are rented properties. How are we monitoring the payment of rent tax, for example? We could put them into work camps that would be set out to check on every house on every street, whether it's a rented property or owner-occupied. Who is the landlord? Who is the tenant? How much rent do you pay? What is the duration of the rent? You are just picking the data on which we can now serve the person with notice to declare how much he has raised and how much he has paid as taxes, failing which the person has to pay. In the course of that, you will find businesses located in residential communities. They are not even registered for tax purposes. All those would come out because you see the company, you take the name, you have the location. We do a search, whether it's registered for tax purposes and whether it is paying its taxes. And then we go after them. I'm sure we'll raise enough to be able to pay them. Now, talking about those who were asked to go home and the recovery period, I think that government did its bit, trying to give a lot of incentives. I remember the hotel industry, for example, had 30% waiver of their tax liabilities, and then the informal sector had the second, third, and fourth quarter liability waived. The idea is to enable them be able to sustain the earnings they would have used to pay taxes, to be able to re-engage these people when things normalize. So I think that, yes, the first stage would be to get those who were asked to go home to take back their jobs, whilst the others would be in the waiting line, hoping that the recovery will be faster for them to be re-engaged. That would be my take on that.
When would that hope be realized? Since these persons, you look at the recent recruitment in the security agencies, and it tells you the number of persons out there who are in badly need of jobs. When will this hope be realized?
That is realistic, and the unemployment is that there because you realize that for some people I engaged, they had to even drop from school to go and apply for these jobs because they are not even able to pay their tertiary education fees. And so they dropped out to apply. If they get it, they will suspend their education and get into the job, hoping to save some money and then continue school on their own. So that is a difficult situation, and as I indicated, efforts should be made to see how we'll be able to extend and find activities for the youth. And if you take most of the sectors on construction, I believe that, as Dr. Ambala said, if government is able to make release of payments to the private sector, I believe they will be able to then take up some of these excess labor which cannot find their way into the government sector. And we used to have this road maintenance contract. We have a lot of segments of those who are looking for job. There are those who did engineering. There are those who did road construction. Those who did... Are they not being able to be aligned to some of the construction companies that government give contracts to? Once you release payments to them, they will be able to hire them for whatever period. There will be a briefing space before they can continue with their search.
Let me come to Dr. Nsambela. So for you, do you think that is enough for government to more of up in arms that, yeah, the public sector is full? What about then hearing from government that, listen, we can't take you in the public sector, but this is what we are doing to accommodate these fresh graduates?
The public sector is indeed full. I think that was really a bold statement from the minister.
Hasn't it been always full?
It has, indeed. And perhaps it's one of the impediments of our growth strategy. Nowhere in the world has the public sector be a sustainable avenue for sustainable growth. The blueprint that has been applied everywhere in the world where unemployment challenges have been solved is to trust the private sector, allow them to build enough agility, enough absorption capacity, put them in the best place where they can expand their businesses, because ultimately they are the ones who can deal with that level of diversified group of individuals seeking employment. So the finance minister was right in many respects. Honestly, he couldn't have said it any better. Most of our multilateral support-based programs, from economic recovery programs, structural adjustment programs, and all, have always stressed on the need for a lean and efficient public sector that now creates the proper enabling environment to support private sector growth. I think that we are underestimating the ability of the private sector to solve this problem. And invariably, as part of our fiscal policies and even as part of our national rhetoric, we seem to make the requirements and the interests of the private sector subservient to the interests and requirements of government. And perhaps if we retool that argument, rationalize our taxes like Dr. Ali said, to deal with the cascading issues around the 3% VAT levy, which in many respects now takes it away from a consumption tax and make it a final tax with cash flow consequences. Find a very reasonable, sensible approach to the provisional assessment so that we don't end up with a scenario that we are currently seeing where in a COVID period when government is even constrained on growth, provisional assessments are still increasing year on year. Where is the private sector supposed to find the money? Because if we are all saying that growth is declining, you're expecting a sensible approach where provisional assessments would also be showing a reduced figure at least versus last year. Ultimately, the strategy would be to empower the private sector, give them a lot of space to be able to manage their cash flows, and then they can then get involved in the expansionary drives. My biggest worry, and at the back end I was discussing with my colleagues here, is about some of the very contradictory tax systems. I personally think that the withholding tax system has outlived its usefulness, because invariably, What the withholding tax system is basically saying is that it is taxing businesses on a transaction per transaction basis. That defies the common sense regarding tax calculations. Taxes are supposed to be paid after profit have been made. They're supposed to be paid either quarterly or at the end of the year. Government is basically pushing its inefficiencies onto businesses and saying, we are not able to appropriately assess you, so on every single transaction that you do, we are going to collect a tax. They come back and tell you it's not a final tax. But that's not the problem. It's the cash flow problem that it creates for businesses. Invariably then, you get into a vicious cycle where businesses are constrained, they are not able to propel growth, they are not able to pay you a lot more taxes, and then the cycle keeps continuing.
Thank you, Doc. Let me come to another Doc, Timothy Balfour, on your thoughts about this job thing and how we should go about it. The bit about the challenge of bringing back those who were asked to go home, and also the request from fresh graduates as well. And how should this budget help in either way to deal with this challenge?
I believe that with employment, what employers would normally do is that when you're asking people to go home, the first will go first. So first in, first out. And when you are recalling, you recall your more experienced workers. That is if they are not approaching the retirement age, of course. So in that regard, young people in particular are at a very dire state right now, because even those who had jobs had lost it. So the focus should be on channeling our resources, the states taking on a more productive developmental orientation to drive the private sector, support them. Our regulatory agencies should re-strategize and support businesses, have a mindset of supporting them to grow, rather than, as usual, playing a role of a master-servant relationship with businesses. Because at the backbone of the growth of this economy is that the private sector has to do well so that the economy grows to generate the number of jobs that are needed. But the question I keep asking is, but for COVID, unemployment situation would always be with us. It has been exacerbated with COVID, we understand. But the challenge is really, as a country, we have not thought critically over a long-term plan with regards to our expansion in our population. Young people are born every day. We know the fertility rates. Decades ago, we know that Ghana had a high fertility rate. These young people were going to grow, and now they've entered the labor market. But we didn't plan ahead in terms of structural transformation to create the needed jobs. And that brings us back to the educational sector, for example, that is preparing the young people for the job market. We are talking about entrepreneurship. Are young people being taught, being educated to use their hands? When you go to the construction sector, for example, you will be amazed that most of the jobs in the construction sector are taken by foreigners. We don't have professional plumbers, professional electricians. Our educational system is focusing so much on arts and humanities at the detriment of engineering, technical skills. The wisdom behind the conversion of technical polytechnics into technical universities was to create a channel for people to get productive routes, get a degree, and still be a plumber. But unfortunately, when you look at the curriculum of our technical institutions, they are all running management, art, humanity courses. So at the end of the day, we need to pull back, sit up, and see how we train the workforce today for the labor market tomorrow, because the world of work is changing, and technical skills is taking priority over art and humanities, and that is what we need to think critically about, against a digitization drive and an innovation where the young people are trained to be adept in technical knowledge, technology, adopt technology, use soft skills to propel the economy going forward.
Dr. Priscilla Tumasi Balfour, thank you so much. And a round of applause for our distinguished guest here. interesting thoughts. It will be time to get back to the audience and some captains of industry that I see here. But if my ushers are ready, I want you to get the mics ready because I want to go back to the Minister of State in charge of Finance, Charles Adu Boahen, for any quick comment. Then I move to Mr. Vishashagbo. He is in the accounting industry. What are the concerns of those firms that he's been working on? I also see the Ghana-UK Chamber of Commerce president also here. Guta president also here. MD of Republic Bank is also here. So we'll do some quick rounds so that we can have a lot of persons sharing their thoughts on these issues here. So let me get back to the Minister of State Finance, Charles Adu Boahen, for some quick comment, please, on the concerns being raised on the issues that you expressed. Microphones, please.
Thank you. George, I thought you were going to do a nice summary for me. All the points that were raised. I think that's part of your job description last
Don't worry,
time.
I'll do it, sir.
Anyway, thanks a lot. Very insightful comments. I can see the passion and the concern for Ghana and for the upcoming budget. First, a point of clarification. I never said no new taxes. Mm-hmm. I can see the headlines tomorrow already in my sleep. Please.
So now we are reading your list, right?
Let us clarify. Never read my lips. I never said that. That was just a joke. So let's get that on record. But I do appreciate the concerns, and I do appreciate the need for us to figure out ways to increase our revenue without necessarily increasing the burden on the average Ghanaian. But I think it is clear that we certainly are not paying our fair share as a people. I think right now we have under 2 million people who pay personal income tax. The number is between 1.5 to 2 million people who are PAYE payers. If you juxtapose that against the number of, let's say, mobile money subscribers, just to get an idea of how many economically active people there are, I think MTN alone has, 17 million active mobile money subscribers?
More than that.
11? Okay, but total subscribers? About 17, about 17 million. So there are 17 million, and then if you look at the total population of 30 million people, I think we can conservatively assume that about half of that is above the employment age and maybe economically active in some form or fashion. That puts you at 15 million people. Even if you say your unemployment rate is 30%, that takes out 4.5 million people, so there should be 10 million people paying some kind of income tax. But yet you have less than 2 million people. So you literally have 2 million people carrying the burden and the weight of 30 million people. That is not equitable, nor is it fair. And until we solve that conundrum, we really can't even begin to say that we are addressing the challenges. And, nobody asks the question, hey, have you paid your taxes today? Did you pay yesterday? And I remember somebody alluded to the professionals, the lawyers, and so forth and so on. I mean, I don't want to point anybody out, but really, it doesn't come to us naturally that we have a responsibility to participate in how we grow this economy. And that all these demands we are making, electricity, infrastructure, water, healthcare, cost money. And who has to pay for it? And I think collectively, if we all put our shoulders to the wheel and contribute our fair share, it won't be much. If we all do the right thing, you realize that actually the tax burden will be less because it will be spread over a much wider base and everybody will just have to do a little and we'll all be better off. But because that's not happening, I get corporates come to me to complain. They are always being, come after by GRA because they happen to be, the names everybody knows. Meanwhile, there are 10,000 other small ones who are not, supporting. So I think that is something that we need to figure out how we formalize the economy and get everybody to participate. Because I think if we provide the means and make it easy, I think I looked at the tax filing form the other day, and I was surprised about how complicated it is. We need to simplify it. I mean, you almost need a CPA with 3 degrees to walk you through the forms. It doesn't have to be that difficult. If you only have one job, you should be able to file a very short form, say how much did I earn, this is how much I earned, this is how much taxes I paid. Boom, you send it in. Government should have the option and the right to audit you randomly and just to ascertain and verify if what you said was true. If it's not true, you get penalized and fined, And that form should be available as an app that you can download, and then pay with mobile money or something. We need to make it easy for people to meet their obligations, And I think if we do, a lot more people will participate. And I think we are on track with the digitalization drive, the national ID system, and so forth and so on. So we'll get there, but we need the support and the encouragement from everybody, and that constant reminder to everybody that, it is your duty and obligation to participate in this economy. So that's the first thing. And we also, somebody spoke about exemptions bill and the property rates. And, I totally agree. I mean, we've been talking about this exemptions bill from 2017, 2018. And in fact, we just submitted a draft to cabinet. The plan is to try and get it laid before Parliament, before we submit the budget. I think we have a meeting tomorrow to finalize that and get it laid. But the objective is not to enter 2022 without the exemptions bill laid. It's taking too long. I didn't mention it because I get embarrassed because, it's like a lot of talk. I think you kind of alluded to that, but no action. So, I want to see the action first before, we speak. Same with the property rates. We've done a lot of work. I'm sure you've all seen now the plaques in front of the houses that, have provided everybody with a digital address. That is the first step to us being able to provide a common platform to apply property taxes and property rates and to get that done. That is something else that we've said time and again. Unfortunately, it's taken us a long time to get it done, but we are almost there. That's another thing that I'm certain come January of next year, you'd see a full rollout. And, those are some of the very low-hanging fruit that everybody points to that we really have to get done, just to show that we are serious and that we mean what we say. I didn't understand the question about the private sector debt. I didn't understand exactly what was meant by that. I think when it comes to private sector, the challenge is to deal with access to capital and financing that affordable rates that can really be used to grow businesses. In this country, we don't have a culture of private equity and venture capital, but it's very, very difficult to start a business with debt financing. You're doomed before you start. There's something in economics called a J-curve, which shows that before your business becomes profitable, you go through some losses before you come into profitability. How are you going to be able to service any kind of debt during that period where you are losing money if you base your business on debt financing? You need equity to be able to have a fighting chance to get through the J-curve into profitability. So we really need to come up with private equity type models. The United States did it with their small business units, and that was a key driver that created the boom in entrepreneurship back in the 60s and the 50s. So I think that's another discussion that we need to have and to understand and see how best we can really generate or draw out equity investors, whether it's through an angel investing platform or a crowdfunding platform, some kind of platform that suits the sort of pay-as-you-go model that seems to work well in these parts. And that's the only way that we can facilitate and support small businesses to grow and create the opportunities and the jobs that we so need. We also have to realize that really and truly, if we don't address the leverage situation through interest rates and really looking at the cost of financing, it really limits us and our ability to be able to grow and the ability and the amount of our revenue that we are using to service that. We also have challenges in the energy sector and in the financial sector, which have largely been resolved now, but there's still there's stuff to be done. And these are two key pillars in any type of growth story. You need cheap energy, reliable energy for any manufacturing or industrialization to grow, and you need cheap funding to finance these businesses. So those two pillars really need to be resolved and resolved permanently so that they can underpin the type of growth we have. I'll end here, but maybe come back later after I've listened to all the questions. I'm sure some of them will be directed at me anyway, so I'll have another chance to respond. Thank you.
Definitely. Honorable Minister, thank you so much. Let me come to some notable individuals representing some business community that are here now. I would advise that we can be as brief as possible so we can capture a lot of concerns and questions. But let me start with Mr. Bishop Shagbo. A quick one on 3 minutes, 2 minutes, quick one. Concerns what you heard so far, engaging businesses, working on their books, advising them, their concerns going into this 2022 budget. Can we get him the microphone, please?
George, good morning, and good morning, everybody. I wasn't actually expecting to speak. I was here to listen and learn, but I guess there's no free breakfast, so I'll just make a couple of comments. In terms of the concerns that we hear from the business community, I think the panel has spoken about that, as indeed has the Honorable Minister. It's about the apparent lack of equity in how the tax burden is being shared. Right, so you have a lot of the major corporates who feel that they are soft targets and that the GRA is always on their backs in terms of taxes, sometimes perhaps unfairly so. So they're looking forward to a more equitable way of raising taxes. And I think my colleagues on the panel have actually done justice to that subject, because I think all the laws and regulations are there. It's just a matter of enforcement. And I think where we are today as a nation, the enforcement and our own discipline in terms of compliance is now key. The second point, ironically, is about employment and skills. So there's a lot of conversation about insufficient employment opportunities, et cetera, et cetera. For our clients in the private sector, and indeed for ourselves as a private sector institution, we actually have the opposite problem, which is that you can hardly find people with the right set of skills to employ. There are jobs available. However, how to match the requirements of the job with the skills that are in the market is where the problem is. And therefore, there's a conversation that we probably need to have about the training, skills development, learning mechanisms that are out there. But I guess that's a whole different subject we'll not get into this morning.
The jobs. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say my final comment, which may be a little bit off script, is that listening to everything that's been discussed here today and having heard similar remarks previously, I think perhaps it's time for all of us as a country to actually begin to examine ourselves in terms of what our contribution is to all of this. We always point fingers at government, but the truth is that government can only set the tone, set the policy, set the environment. But some things like civic education and our civic responsibilities and what each of us should be doing to support the national agenda, perhaps is a conversation that we now need to get into seriously. So, George, let me pause there and allow others to comment.
So, Mr. Shagba, these jobs at PricewaterhouseCoopers, but it's about the right skills, right?
Well, I'm not just referring to PwC in general, but I mean, we work with a number of private institutions who perhaps are looking to employ. And one of the things we help them do is to find people with the requisite skills and experience. And all I'm saying is that it can often be a challenging endeavor.
Let me come to the president of GUTA on your quick comment, and if you'll be as brief as possible so that I can still capture everyone. You could get him Dr. Joseph Obeng with his comment from traders out there on the market and their concerns about or expectations on the 2022 budget.
Thank you very much. I think we have a very rich panel. Most of the issues raised here have been captured into the input that we sent to the Ministry of Finance, and it makes me very happy. From the minister's speech, I could also see that he has gotten a whole lot of an insight into the problems that we face as a country. And so we are on course. We haven't identified that the bane of our problem is value for money and how to prune down on our expenditure. As for the taxes, we have started showing signs of fatigue from the business circles. So we know that when you said we should read your lips, you've clearly understood what the business community is feeling. We have to prune down, we have to find ways to plug the loopholes. As you clearly said, when it comes to warehousing, when it comes to the free zones, the activities that are going there are a lot of leakages. So we have to look at the existing taxes and enhance on those taxes, expand the tax net, as most of us have said, the tax exemption policy that have been said so many times. I think it's about time that we make actions on all these things. In our input that we submitted to government, we have told government, Ministry of Finance, I hope, Minister, you've read it. We said that we wish to also appeal to the ministry to provide a page or a paragraph to explain in the budget statement the mechanism put in place by the ministry to ensure value for money, transparency, and accountability for the revenue to be generated. Okay. That's the bane. Okay. We have to be able to use our resources very well, look at the priority areas, and we can go forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Doc. And I believe it might be right to open the floor for quick questions and contributions. Simon Maji, Executive Secretary, American Chamber of Commerce, Ghana. I believe that you also have some question that you wanted to throw to the Minister of Finance. But now I will open the floor. So if I see your hands raised up, and I'll plead with you, be as brief as possible with your question or your contribution, please. Let me start first with Simon. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. Good morning to you all. Honorable Minister, it's a pleasure listening to you. And I would like to defer to my colleague from the UK Chamber, Ajoba, for giving me the chance to speak on behalf of the foreign trade associations in the country. My question to you is about what will be in the budget to encourage a lot more FDI into the country. After COVID, we all appreciate that we need to work a lot more, build local partnerships, but we need to promote Ghana as a favorable destination for FDI. And so what would be in the budget to assist with that? Thank you.
Thank you so much. I have another guest here who wants to make a quick question. Yeah.
So, my name is Eric Nsakon. I work as head of engineering for Stanbic. I just wanted to make a quick comment. Maybe we need to see who I am. But on digitization, I realized that for the industries we are talking about, compared to the digital sector, where worldwide, America, China, the jobs are being created on Google, Netflix, Facebook, and so on and so forth. For Ghana, you would realize there must be something happening on the MTN platform that led to 250,000 agents being set up and jobs being created among merchants and so on. But the policy angle of it, I think if we're going to talk about revenues and closing the gap, and then we have to talk about how you scale these things. Because I recall that, in 2013, when the MTN platform was handed to me as head of sales of MTN at the time, it was 200,000 Ghanaians who were using it every month. I think the last quarterly report they did was 11.5 million or something like that, and still growing. I mean, well, declining now. But I'm talking about the scale being very linked to what Mr. Shabo just mentioned, that inside that skill set, we've had to talk to Shesi University, to University of Ghana, Dartmouth University, and KNUST, and put in a lot of human resource partnerships, up strategies with the Folklore Commission, creating the creative base of the country and using that to inform engineers, training engineers, doing a lot of stuff. And I think it calls for a kind of program. I recall that it's about 5 years ago that when His Excellency the President was made chairman of the co-chair of the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, we were at the Jubilee House with His Excellency the Vice President. And at the time, the ask was that corporates must put forward some corporate social investment to create some jobs. So a few people put some commitments in to do some things with coconut, with cashew, and so on. But you see, if cocoa has 800,000 jobs, is it? I think there have been various census on the industry. And digital platforms are already doing 250,000 people in airtime, 250,000 people in mobile money, or 250,000 in mobile money or something like that, in a space of 6-7 years. And it's still growing. I mean, if you talk about the kinds of products that are also coming through the banking sector and so on and so forth, this calls for some drive to be able to create the volumes in the economy. And it might require also that, the likes of myself who are 51 years old step back, and
the young ones.
And the young ones also come forward in dialogue like this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let me do about 3 quick questions or 4. First, Napi want, gentleman in court, your name and where you're coming from.
Thank you very much. My name is Eric Amponsabuati. I'm with PKF.
Accountant firm PKF?
Yes.
Oh, thank you.
Dr. Ali Nacha made mention of filing returns and making payment online. And I think that we have raised this issue so many times in the past, and we're happy that the GRA has put that into fruition. The other issue is that GRA has now established an office which we call the high net worth. And what they're doing is that they are looking out for people who, in terms of properties and all that, including some men of God, and they are doing a good job. So if you are here and you get a call from the high net worth office, then probably they want to look at your assets and ensure that all the filing that you've done agrees with probably the assets that you own. Dr. Is it Asumbila? Hambila, yes. You made a point regarding withholding taxes, and you feel that probably if you had your own way, we should do away with it. But I don't think that we can do away with them. They are payments made on account, and without that, GRA will lose a lot. Probably you also don't know when you withhold or when you are being affected to the extent that it starts getting into your working capital, and there's proof. You can apply for the withholding tax exemption, and that is also going to be given to you. And our lady there, I think she is more into entrepreneurship, and I think that I agree with her. Those technical universities, we find in reading, marketing, and all that. What is the National Accreditation Board doing, and which body is there to ensure that they go by that? Finally, to the minister, I think before we came into the show, somebody asked me 5 things that I expect government to do in the 2022 budget. I gave them only 4. One is that the National Fiscal Stabilization Levy, it's been there all these years. I want to know whether in 2022 it's still going to be there, because the 5% of profit before tax, if it's not there, that could be used to expand those businesses.
Okay.
And then we also want to appeal to him, duties. Government must look at that. You also have tax holidays for new businesses, entrepreneurs that want to come up. Even with the law now, I have a challenge, because if you are on tax holiday, you're on tax holiday, but in this law, if you are on tax holiday and you make a chargeable income, you're supposed to pay 1%. So where is it coming from? So I hope that they'll take that one off. Utilities, electricity, water, raw materials that you need to be able to start whatever business. Government cannot give monies to people, but I think that government must create an enabling environment so that businesses can thrive. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Can I respond to the withholding tax issue?
Okay, quick one. Look.
Okay, so, hello, sir. So I have a fair understanding of the withholding tax law. And I understand your issue about the fact that, technically speaking, it is a tax on account. I'm talking about the cash flow consequences on business. Because withholding tax is really not a tax, it's a form of tax collection. And substantively, the form of tax collection is taxing government, is taxing businesses per transaction. What it does is that it puts the needs of government ahead of the needs of businesses. And ultimately, you get into a vicious cycle where businesses are starved of the cash they need to run their businesses, and subsequently end up paying less taxes in the end. Even now, there has been some transformation in the ability to get the TCCs, the withholding tax certificates. Previously, that in itself was a challenge, and the ability to collect that money as a form of refund against your annual tax that is calculated at the end was actually problematic, because it required you to have access to the withholding tax certificates that actually delay in coming. There has been some remarkable improvement in that. The jurisprudence of it, in my view, I'm using the wrong legal term, is that government was looking at a way to collect money because it did not have an effective system to tax all tax people. Now, my position is that over the years of operating this withholding tax system, like Dr. Ali alluded to, we've built enough database now, and I've implemented an effective automation system to stop passing on that inefficiency to businesses. And then government now gets into the way of not using withholding tax as a means of, because in any case, how do you determine that 3% or 20% or 15% that you collect is actually a percentage of the profit and not actually eating? Now that bureaucratic process of going all the way back to get a withholding tax exemption certificate, I am aware that the process is very complicated, almost impossible, because the requirements are very difficult.
Okay.
So we need to get to the point where government will start appreciating the fact that businesses need to survive, and in surviving, by surviving, they are able to generate enough to pay the taxes. Okay. Now, to the minister around the property tax, I'll give you a free advice, and I was suggesting that to my colleagues. We have a prepaid system for electricity collection. And for example, if I tell you I live in East Legon, you have a fair idea that the value of my property is higher than if I tell you I live in Ashaiman. So whilst you are trying to figure out how to use intelligence systems around the various automation systems you are implementing, how about just adding the property tax rate to the ECG bills that you give to clients? And then by that, you are basically just zeroing in on the locations of the properties. So a property in Laboni would have a higher rate, just like we do for street lights and others, than an Ashaiman, or I'm not, for want of a better word, disrespecting any area. I'm basically just talking about the average value of property. And then spread it conveniently over a year. You may end up with some inequities because invariably you'll be charging all properties the same, but that brings in a little bit more, whilst you try to sort out the problem of sending people to drop letters and then going to court and all that kind of stuff. That may be an approach. Now, you also mentioned the issue of not understanding the point about debt. The point I was making is that government owes a lot of money to the private sector, and we need to start having a consistent approach to dealing with this. I am aware of a commitment in the budget every year about how much of that debt will be settled. What that figure doesn't include is an appreciation of the total value for us to know whether what you are doing is substantial enough or not. Because if you come like you did last year to tell me you are going to pay 3.5 billion cedis to the private sector, how much do you really owe them? My understanding based on some information is that you use roughly a 10% target. If you do, it means that you owe them a roughly 35 billion cedis. 3.5 versus 35 is a very infinitesimal amount. What that does is that it sucks out the liquidity out of the private sector. And then again, we get into the vicious cycle where they are not able to expand enough, absorb, create business, and pay the taxes. So the issue is that government needs to keep to its contractual commitment to businesses, that when we do business with you and we say we are going to pay you by this time, we'll prioritize that payment and actually pay you your money.
Thank you so much.
That was the point I was making.
Thank you so much, Doc. So let me get back to the audience again. Yes, the man in the African print over there. If you can sum up your question under 2 minutes or 3 minutes, I'll be grateful and be as brief as possible.
I'll do that. I'm Kwabna Otu. I work for the TUC. About the debt situation and the taxation. I think the minister, I like your clarification that you are not saying there should be not any new taxes. There could be no new taxes, but we could do something about some of the existing taxes. So, for example, the IMF, and this is the first time the TUC agrees with the IMF, is suggesting that government should raise taxes on tobacco, cigarette, and alcohol. If you take cigarette, the tax on it today is about 16% of the retail price. The World Health Organization recommendation is that it should go to about 70%. So probably we could consider some increasing what they call the sin tax on cigarette, alcohol, soft drinks that are causing diabetes. Is one consideration we could do. But on the other side of the debt thing is also the expenditure question. I think there has to be something done about the expenditure side of government. You know, before 2016, there used to be this debate about a school 6-class unit block built by the private sector and the one built by government. We need to check whether the figures have changed. Our understanding is that government is still building 6-unit classroom block at twice what it costs the private sector to build. And something has to be done about the expenditure side of government. Entrepreneurial, I agree with the minister that we need to build an entrepreneurial society. More young people will have to be entrepreneurial. But the first thing we should ask ourselves is, what is the current crop of entrepreneurs? What are they doing? How are they faring? Take all the entrepreneurial activities that emerged in this country around March 2020, around face masks and PPEs. What has happened to them? What happened to the face masks people were producing in the informal economy? What happened to them? We need to account for that. And it will help us to understand exactly the problem of entrepreneurial activity in this country. About employment and the lack of skills, I think it is also behoves on employers to consider training and not think that anybody from the university is a fully baked material for them. They should train those people. My last question is to the minister. In April 2020, the G20 put forward something about debt called the DSSI, Debt Service Suspension Initiative, which allow countries like Ghana to suspend the payment of debt or debt services to creditor countries. And in fact, I think this year, Ethiopia has even asked the Paris Club of Creditors to suspend their debt payment, and they have agreed. Given the level of debt and the problem it causes for the budget, how come government did not take advantage of the DSSI or other initiatives that could have ameliorated our debt situation for us? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Due to some time constraints, I think I'll let the minister respond to some of these questions and contributions, and then I come to the podium, and then we round up, please. Mr. Minister, please. Microphone. Microphone, yeah, the minister needs one.
Thank you. Today, Atu is a very good friend from way back, but today he's really making me work for my breakfast. But I haven't even seen the breakfast even here too. No, I'm joking. Let me start with the last gentleman first, because that's quite fresh in my memory. Interesting observation about the DSSI initiative, which is quite interesting. You know, I went back and I looked at our creditors and our creditor profile in the 80s and the 90s, and even the 2000s. At the time, maybe 80% of our debt was from bilateral and multilateral agencies, primarily concessional in nature. And so that's what the Paris Club represents, those type of creditors. Now, in 2007 was the first time we went to the capital markets, international capital markets, and did our first Eurobond. Subsequently, I think we've been back 8, 9 times, I can't remember. Today, if you look at our debt stock, it's flipped around, where you have commercial debt being about 80% of our total international borrowing, and 20% being your DFIs and so forth and so on. So that discussion around debt forgiveness, the DSI, sign up for DSSI, pertain to that 20% of our total debt stock. So signing up for that would have given us only debt for, and it wasn't even debt for, it was debt deferment. So what we're saying was that we'll defer servicing of this debt for a year or two while this COVID goes. And then when you come back, by the way, you have to pay that and pay more. So it really wasn't that attractive. And what did that mean also? It meant that it would have shut us off from the market access, because a key condition in any commercial borrowing is that any forgiveness or restructuring is an event of default, which means that immediately our bonds would have come due on our commercial borrowing, and we also would have been shut out from going to these markets, capital markets, to raise financing. So we deliberated hard and long on the options available to us. And even though in terms of just the talk, it seemed like a nice option that the Western world was making available to us, when you went into the fine detail, it really was not, it did not help us as a country. And so we took the decision to say thank you, but no thank you. And we think that it was the right decision given the dynamics. There are some other African countries where still 80-90% of their debt is from multilaterals and so forth, and they take advantage of it. I don't think Ethiopia has ever been to the Eurobond markets, but I stand to be corrected. And so, you know, they have a different problem and a different debt portfolio, so it may have been attractive to them. So that's the point there. Expenditures, rationalization. I think, you know, if you look at the growth trajectory we had before COVID, where we managed to do almost 7% year-on-year GDP growth, and you compare it to the less than 3% growth that we inherited in 2016, you have to ask yourself, what was the difference? And I dare say that the difference was value for money, where through tender processes and insisting on competitive tendering, we managed to use the same amount of money or less on capital expenditures, but yet generate a lot more value because we were actually trying to maximize value for money through competitive bidding processes. And that was reflected in the growth rates. In fact, a lot of times when we went on our road shows, a lot of questions the investors will ask is that, guys, you know, when I look at your capex as a percentage of your budget, it's declining. So we are very concerned about your growth and how you're going to generate the growth. And we're like, but look at the GDP growth rates, and it shows that we are certainly growing. So therefore, what you are not getting is the fact that the impact of every dollar or CD we spend seems to be a lot more than prior. Having said that, of course, there are still issues, and I think expenditure rationalization is very important and is one that we have to look at carefully. And we also have quite a lot of social programs that cost money, but that we believe are very important in terms of lifting Ghanaians out of poverty and, moving us forward. I maintain the argument that free SHS is an investment in human capital and should be seen as a capital expenditure, because in this day and age where everybody's moving to a service-oriented economy, investing in your people provides you with the capacity to be able to compete in a service-oriented economy. And so, whereas people will see free SHS as a goods and services and, maybe an operational expense, it's not. It's a capital expenditure, and it is about improving the productive capacity of your people. And when we are looking at our CapEx numbers to see what we are doing, it is something that we should include in that initiative. And I'm hoping that I've been trying to argue that, apparently the chart of accounts or so forth does not include education as part of your CapEx, but I think it's something that we should really look at in that sense. It's very important. Now, somebody asked about what are we doing in this budget to attract FDI flows. It's amazing, but smart money finds its way to places where they believe that the investment opportunity is right. Investment opportunity is right if the macro fundamentals are right. All you do is you stabilize your economy, you bring your interest rates low, you stabilize your currency, and you create an enabling environment, and the smart money will find you. That's how you attract FDI flows. You provide an environment that is conducive and stable, and that is what we are trying to do. I think those were the main issues. And then about the private sector debt. That's an interesting one. The reason why I was confused is because I don't think of it as debt. It is, if you want to stretch it, it is an account payable that may have been delayed. It's not a debt. When you enter into a contract with a contractor, he's supposed to provide a service or an asset, and you're supposed to pay. You pay for it on the presentation of IPCs. Even in a traditional company, you have days payable and days receivable, where you have a credit cycle of maybe 90 days or 120 days. Yes, government, maybe their credit cycle is a little longer, but we are still the most reliable creditor on the planet. I see contractors come in every day who would rather do business with government than do business in the private sector. Why is that? Because they know government will pay. And they build into their contracts an amount to take care of the perceived delays in payments. Right, and that actually is another problem why we see some of our contract sums be a lot more expensive. And if we had the wherewithal to pay contractors on time, I dare say these contract sums will come down. It comes down back to your revenue argument, where we have to make sure that we can generate more revenue. Because right now we have some fixed obligations that take up a lot of our revenue, being salaries, compensation, that takes up maybe 40% or more of our revenue. And your interest payments, that takes up another 40, 50%. You do those two, then you have your statutory payments, which means that up to 25% of your revenue is earmarked and has to go to certain statutory obligations. And you've exceeded 100% already. So, the room to maneuver is pretty tight, and we always have to figure out ways to be able to improve that. And really the solution comes right back to revenue and how we expand this tax net and make sure that we we bring everybody into the net to be able to help us grow. So on that note, I'll say, read my lips, new taxes. Thank you.
Now you're reading your lips. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, because of time constraints, I need to draw the curtain down. But quick 2 minutes wrap from each of my distinguished guests here, Dr. Lee Nachia, and Doc, and Dr. Missy Bafo. Can we do a wrap up, 2 minutes each, please?
Okay. Thank you very much. I think I wanted to add a little to the proposal by TUC on the expenditure management. Maybe Honorable Minister would want to consider the idea of construction audits for the projects that he mentioned. And then for other countries, they've been now undertaking lifestyle audits so that if people are rather taking it away from government, we can recover. And then also on the point by Honorable Minister on the employees and the PAYE, I think one key area is the current linkage of the TIN to the SNIT numbers. It will help us plug some loopholes because the last time I checked, as you indicated, the employees were around 12.5 million, yet we have 1.5 to 2 million. So if you look at the current collection by the GRA, they mentioned 39.9 billion. So it means that if we should get more, or even the current number, if we are to double it, then we can meet the target of the collection we've given them. Thank you very much.
Okay.
In a lot of the discussion, there are 2 points that come out. The lack of visibility on the total tax burden on the private sector. So, for example, I heard a point about taxing cigarettes and hard liquor even more. And it looks as if the discussion was about the top line tax, forgetting that there's a very restrictive excise tax regime for those products. Now, those taxes add up to the burden as well. There's a very excise tax regime for some of those products as well. That should be considered as, yes, there is an element of passing on, but in the interim, it always does have a cash flow effect, and then based on the elasticities, has an effect on the demand and the profit. In discussing businesses, we seem to be forgetting the various levers of taxes that businesses are burdened with. I think that perhaps businesses need to use the advocacy group to provide that level of visibility for people to start appreciating. I mean, for example, if you take a typical business, for example, is dealing with a 25% tax, is dealing with an overdue stabilization tax of 5%. If it is a branch or an external company, is dealing with another 8% on repatriated profit. That is based on an assumption that the profit will be repatriated in future, not the fact that the profit has actually been repatriated. So if you add up just that chain alone, that human being is, or that business is paying in excess of 40% of his taxes, of his profit as taxes. Then you have to deal with all the burdens of the input-output VAT, the cascading from the levies and all that. The lack of visibility on how that affects businesses seems to be problematic. And for example, I find it very worrying for debt to businesses called accounts payable not to be considered as debt. That actually is problematic. It is debt because it's suffocating businesses. And it cannot just be subjected to our ability to pay when we can. That's not how it's supposed to work. Businesses need to survive. If they are owed, they have to be paid. Now, the whole point about skills, a match between skills and employment, it's a problem that exists, but I think we need to put it in its perspective. That is not a large-scale problem, because it takes away from the fact that we do have a burdensome unemployment problem that needs to be solved. There are some skills problems, but I would like to refer to the point the TEC boss made, and to the point a former Vice Chancellor of the University of Ghana made. Universities are not higher-level polytechnics. So no matter what level of students come out, businesses need to consider it as part of their pastoral obligation to bring these human beings up. It cannot be said that human beings right out of the university are just so fit for purpose. That can't be. And in any case, the portion of the high-level sophisticated jobs that have a skills mismatch is a small blip if you compare it to the burdensome issue about unemployment. So sometimes some of these conversations need to be put in perspective so that they don't distract from the big national issues that need to be dealt with.
Thank you so much, Dr. Priscilla Chimesi-Bafo.
Thank you very much. So in wrapping up, I believe that with regards to revenue mobilization, we should come back to property taxes. The discussion has been on. A study has shown that a simple automation of the process can significantly improve the collection. At the moment, collection of property taxes are ceded to local governments with a lot of inefficiency. Some have contracts with private collectors who have a share of 60 to 40%. There's a lot of leakage at that level. And when you talk about property taxes, it's also more like a chicken and egg situation. If the road leading to my house is that terrible, then what is the motivation to pay? Because people do not see that the taxes they are paying are being put to good use. So this is something that government ought to look at. And in that regard, we have to look at the capital expenditure angle in the budget. When you look at the trend, you see that our capital expenditures are consistently dwindling. And as a developing country, we need the capital expenditure to build on our infrastructure base to develop. The emphasis of our budgets have these days, the minister mentioned, have focused so much on macroeconomic stability. But as a developing country, we need the investment, we need the infrastructure for the private sector to thrive. And as we have obtained the middle income status over the years, we know that aid and grants that supported our budgets have dwindled. So the challenge is for us to look within, be creative, and generate the much needed revenue. And that is where I need to say that we should go back on our agreement we signed in connection with our natural resources and get good value for the resource we have to build our society, given that these resources are not renewable, and think about the future. On the labor market, lastly, I would say that the emphasis when we talk about education has been rightfully so under this government on free SHS, but that is not the end. Because we know the question we should ask ourselves is, how are we preparing our children for the future to be competitive globally, not only in Ghana? Because with digitization, now with COVID, you can live in Accra and work on Wall Street. So are we preparing the younger generation for the competitive global market out there? And that requires a lot of investment. So probably, if consistently free SHS is becoming an albatross on us, maybe we should pause the brake, rethink it. It's a great policy for poor people, but for those who can pay, if we can rationalize the policy and make them pay, so that we can deliver value and prospective and productive education for young people to be competitive internationally, then we'll be doing Ghana a great service. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Priscilla Chumesi-Bafo. She is a senior lecturer at the Department of Economics, University of Ghana. Dr. Randolph Ansambila, he's also a senior lecturer at GEMPA and also a financial consultant. And lastly, Dr. Abdullah Ali Nachia, senior lecturer, School of Law, and also a tax expert. A round of applause for our distinguished guests who are here, and even for yourself as well. I appreciate you so much